Dr. Jazz.
I think he played in Cerkno, in Jazz Cerkno, I remember. And in Ljubljana many times, I guess, yeah.
Cerkno, yeah. I still have the yes, I still have the T-shirt from Cerkno, which I wear.
Yeah, well, I love that always.
Nice shirt.
Yeah, but thanks so much, Elliott. Yeah, it's I love it. We played there this year, so hopefully it will happen. We play in July in Jazz Cerkno, so let's hope things are. No, I'm part of an improvising quartet, like with a bass player, piano player, and a drummer, and I play acoustic 12-string and 6-string. So, should be fun. Looking forward.
Who are your? Oh, now I'll interview you. Who are your 12-string influences?
Oh man, I mean, like if I really go 12-string, I would say Ralph Towner and Marc Ducré. Marc Ducré, but I went through. No,
I've never heard Marc play 12-string. No,
I think he did, like on his solo records. Yeah.
I haven't heard that. I mean, I've only seen him. You know, we've been together at festivals a number of times, and usually he's just playing 6-string.
Yeah, like on some solo records.
Have you ever listened to Pete Cozy play 12-string?
No, I mean I know who he is, but I didn't know he played 12-string. Really?
Yeah. There are some live videos of Miles Davis with him playing 12-string.
Really?
And it's fantastic because he has his own tuning on 12-string. That's.
Oh man, I have to check this out.
That's incredible.
Yeah, Leo Kotke. I mean, he was good also. You know, like these guys, kind of like.
Yeah.
But I really try to play it more open, like improvised in an improvised context. I love the sound of it. You know, when you go to the bass strings, it's like I love that. Yep. Did you ever play 12-string? Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, no, a lot. Many records, starting with my maybe even the first record, Hara, the duo record with David Fulton. I believe I play some 12-string.
Oh,
and certainly on my next couple of solo records from 1979 and 80. But then all of my electric records, there'll be some 12-string at some point.
Ah, so it's so hidden.
Sometimes I use it. Sometimes I use it, more texturally. I had a couple of solos on the Tectonics. Is it a Tectonics record or a Terraplane record? And in fact, I was stumped at what I was going to do for a solo. The track was completely finished. No, I believe it's on Hepticon, which was released by an Italian label.
Check it out.
And I was stumped as to what I was going to do to finish the track, and I was taking a break and I was watching some Miles Davis, and I saw Pete Cozy play this fantastic solo on 12-string. I said, okay, so what would Pete Cozy do?
Oh, wow, that's a good one.
So I retuned the 12-string and I did a solo.
Oh, wow, that's beautiful.
I love the instrument. Also, Eugene Chadbourne.
He played 12-string, really?
I think it's on his very first or second record, or maybe both. Acoustic 12-string, all detuned, with preparation, so you can't really tell it's 12-string, but it's a fantastic sound.
It's such an underrated instrument in the guitar world, I think. It's usually used like those folk guys.
Yeah, which are great. I mean, Roger. I saw the Byrds a number of times, and McGrain
really
was directly influenced by John Coltrane in his solo in 8 Miles High.
Yeah. Wow, I didn't know that.
With Clarence White, a couple of times I saw that group with Clarence White and Roger.
Yeah, the Byrds, beautiful. Yeah.
Mind melting.
Yeah, but in the jazz context, in improvised, it's still like this. It's there, which I find fun.
The first one, Robert Lockwood Jr., the great blues guitarist, used 12-string. He would always, and also Pat Martino on his second record.
Yeah, exactly. Those.
I remember seeing him around that area.
Yeah. The East record and the other one. Yeah.
And for that matter, Pat Metheny on Bright Size Life, I believe, is playing some
12-string. Yeah. You're right.
Good. So it's certainly a wonderful instrument. I mean, for me, I like to really push it to sonic extremes where I'm really on the edge of it feeding back, so you really get all the sonorities of
Yeah.
it, you know, all the, especially if the strings, sometimes I'll make the strings just slightly out of tune from each other, the paired strings.
That's a
So
good
then
one.
they
Yeah.
really vibrate, especially if you play through a fuzz box.
No, I just play it acoustically, usually, like just microphone, and that's it. I mean, in a live context, sometimes it's really hard with a drummer. It's impossible, you know. It's
Of course, yeah, no, the drummer changes everything.
yeah.
But
So
EBO is great on a 12 string.
yeah, really. Oh wow, I have to try these things. I never. Yeah.
If you have an EBO, yes.
No, like, but would try to get it, like, you know, fuck it up, the guitar, the tunings, and everything, like, and like, yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
I love that, yeah. But Elliott, you know, you're talking about preparing and playing all this different stuff, and I wanted to ask you. I watched some kind of a stream you did, like Impro Fest last year in November. And it was a solo guitar you played, and
Right.
and then I listened to the other day the concert in Dachau that you did, which I love, by the way, you know, on Intact.
Thank you.
Because it's like so different, you know, the solo jazz or improvised guitar heritage is quite big in a way, and you still make it sound really original how you approach it. And I wanted to ask you, on the basis of these two solo records that I listened to, or I mean footage, how is your approach to a solo improvised gig? How do you dive into that water usually? I mean, like,
Well, you know, I do usually prepare myself with some compositional ideas.
hmm?
For instance, in Dachau, I was working with a D minor tuning. I had just finished recording the album
Yeah.
Velocity of Hue, which you may or may not know. And that was all using D minor tuning, which was the Skip James tuning.
Yeah.
So, you know, I've said this many times, and I'll say it here again. I always believe to have one foot in the past and one foot in the future, and then your ass is right in the now, you know, right in the present.
Yeah.
And you know, so I look to a lot of music that I've loved, you know, all my life, and music that has been around for sometimes hundreds or thousands of years, you know, very much influenced by Indian music and Tibetan music and blues, and just sound, you know, just natural forms and processes, you know, the things you hear in a thunderstorm, or
Yeah.
you know, just outside on a walk in the woods, or well, in New York, it's fire engines and you know, police sirens and garbage cans clanking. But that's part of the sound world too, you know. So, but I try to understand what the sound is going to be, what the whole narrative arc of a piece is going to be before I play. It's not as if I write it out, you know, but it's there in the background, you know. And I think our minds are very powerful systems, and we do a lot of stuff without being aware of it. You know, I call it backgrounding, because just as a computer, you know, you can be working in the foreground, you know, maybe editing something and doing something in the background. You're calculating, you know, some like very large sound files that need to be rendered, or making a video. So all this stuff is there in the background, and sometimes elements of it seep to the foreground, and you say, well, this is an important thing that has to be now foregrounded and brought out into the sound world.
And even in a free context, like, you know, because on that Impro Fest, I don't know if you know which I'm talking about. It's like a 20-minute footage. And
is it the one I played that Sandy Ewan organized? Because I did a couple this during lockdown. Yes.
Yeah, it's during lockdown. It's from November, but it's you know, even if you play completely improvised, because I don't know if you prepared like compositionals there, but even in a free improvised, you kind of make up where you want to go, or how do you base your decisions? I mean, that's my question always. Like, I really.
Well, the decisions, you know, you're not conscious of the decisions. So if you're in the flow, this is the thing, the flow state. The decisions are not like right there in front of you, but they're welling up from inside you. Ideally, your totality is there in the process.
Yeah.
So the question of what is a decision, what is an action, what is a thought, what are you hearing? These are all interconnected. You can't separate one from the other. But the thing is, I often feel as if the first sound gives me the entire narrative arc, and then I just have to fulfill it. I mean, I know sometimes this sounds cosmic, and I'm like, oh man, come and give me a break, you know. But it's true, you know. You hear it, and you feel like you know where you're going to go. You understand what the whole piece is, just the first sound. But the thing is, we have, again, working in the background, what I call the accountant. You know, that voice that says, oh, you know, the B string is out of tune, and it sounds like this battery is going weak, and maybe I shouldn't use the EVO too much, and maybe I'm going to finish this passage, and then I want to go into this program that I made on my eventide pitch factor, so I have to advance the program 6 steps, and you know, so all this stuff is going there in the background.
Yeah.
Ideally, it doesn't interrupt your creative flow. The creative flow happens regardless.
Yeah.
When I do certain concerts, though, like if I'm doing the Thelonious Monk material.
I wanted to ask you that. I love that. Yeah, I love that.
So when I do the Monk material, I'm starting with compositions of monks, you know, themes, and sometimes I'll play it just like a jazz musician would. You know, here's
around midnight cat or whatever,
you know, and do it just like, you know, a jazz guy would. But sometimes I'll just start out with some sounds that gives me a hint of something, and then I'll move into a monk tune, and maybe the way I'll play the monk tune, maybe I'll speed it up so it's incredibly compressed, or maybe I'll slow it down incredibly, maybe I'll substitute notes, maybe I'll just hint at the melody, or maybe I'll play the chords very exactly in time, but what I'm playing to the outside listener might have nothing to do with the chords, even though I'm right on the structure. I'm playing
I love that.
You know, just like some guy who's playing mechanically, you know, but what comes out is different. So it's you know, I just try to stay fluid with the approach. It's very much where you are at the moment. You know, you catch a certain vibe from the audience, maybe not that you're trying to pander to the audience, but maybe you have a feeling that, oh, here's an audience that really wants to hear like some out shit, you know, so I'm going to take it out, you know. Or you look at them and go, well, they look like a bunch of jazz listeners, you know, so maybe you're in some little place that's, you look at the pictures on the wall and it's all very mainstream jazz guys. So, well, what am I doing here, you know?
And like Herb Ellis and Jimmy Rainey pictures, like, man, what?
Well, Jimmy Rainey is a great inspiration.
Oh yeah, I love these guys. But I know what you mean. Yeah.
You know, I mean, most of those guys, you know, most jazz guitar bores me because you can hear that they've practiced all these patterns and there's chord changes. Very few of them really are spontaneous. Wes Montgomery, I always love, you know, because he was a very, very vocal player. It's very hot and spontaneous. Jim Hall, another great
Jim, I love Jim.
player. Jimmy Rainey was a great player. Let me think of who some of the other. Charlie Christian. If you hear live recordings of Charlie Christian, you hear him. You know, you hear him on the Benny Goodman records, and it's still great.
Yeah.
It's very controlled. He's playing it very cool. But you hear there's some live recordings of him at Minton's, and he's really burning. You know, he has a really hot tone. It's not one of these jazz guitar Johns where all the treble is turned off. You know, he's playing with a very warm, distorted tone, and really just incredible.
What a player! Yeah. 1944 or something, man. It's like really scary.
That whole time, you know, it's like, well, and Django Reinhardt, you know, you could hear Django. I love Django's playing.
Yeah.
I mean, really, so many, you know, and everyone, you know, I think the guitar is probably an instrument that has inspired more unique approaches than almost any other instrument.
Yeah.
Same, you know, you have 6 strings and a resonator, you know.
Yeah.
And well, or maybe more, but that's the basic, you know, and just the width and the breadth and the depth of creativity that has gone into making the universe of guitar sounds.
True. Yeah, I never thought about it, but if I think about it now, what you said, it's true. Like all these lines in the music and guitar sounds that happened. But you mentioned all these guitarists. Did you ever also like check out like the European kind of like free improvised tradition, like Derrick Bailey and these guys? Like,
no, of course. I mean, Derrick's was an old friend of mine. I mean,
really, I didn't know.
I began listening to Derrick in 1975, I would say, and I think some records on there was the Cramps record. I'm not sure when that came out. That's my favorite of his, the 2 solo records on Cramps. And some stuff I think on the Guitar Solos collection.
Yeah, he was
some improvising. Oh, the record what was it the first company record? It was on ECM. It was an early one with Jamie Muir.
Shit, yeah, I have it.
Great stuff. Anyway, yeah. So Derrick and Keith Rowe, of course, I loved. You know, great player
Yeah,
at
yeah,
AMM. You know,
yeah.
also completely unique.
Did you ever
artist
play
in a
with these
different
guys
way.
like Derrick? Did you ever?
Well, Derrick and I played a number. Oh yeah,
Oh,
a number of
really?
times with Derrick.
Oh,
With Keith, I've met him a number of times. We always have a very pleasant
yeah,
time hanging out.
it's
The
beautiful.
first time I went to England, my first time out of New York playing, well, there was a gig in Canada, but really my first international gig was in London in 1982 at London Musicians Collective. I was playing with Paul Burwell and Terry Day, who were two great musicians. I don't know how Burwell unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but he was really a phenomenal thinker and sound maker and
Yeah.
pyrotechnician. So we were doing a trio. I was on a bill with George Lewis and Lindsay Cooper.
Oh, wow.
And Keith
Wow.
was in the audience, and he came up to me, and Keith was very supportive, and we just had a wonderful conversation. At that time, I was playing a fretless Stratocaster as my
Wow.
main instrument,
It's beautiful.
and for improvising anyway. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I was always making guitars and collecting whatever cheap junk guitars I could find.
Yeah.
Which sometimes meant, I mean, like my first cheap junk guitar was the 1964 Stratocaster. I was very lucky, you know.
Yeah,
But,
that's junk.
you know,
Yeah.
yeah, you just find what you can and make sounds with it. But you know, so I was using a fretless Stratocaster. Then I was playing also then very percussively a lot
Yeah.
of harmonics, sliding harmonics preparations. So
Yeah.
Keith understood. Sometimes I would get a little weird looks from players, you know, because I really felt my motive force was coming out of rock music, even though I'd listened to jazz
Oh,
and
really?
classical
Oh,
music all
wow.
my life, and you know, and I thought of myself as a composer,
Yeah.
but really the kind of energy that I liked playing with was like from playing rock and blues. You know, I liked saturated guitar sounds. I like a guitar sound that's hot. As
Yeah.
I said, not the cool jazz sound where
Yeah, yeah.
the tone is rolled off and they're playing a lot of notes. I mean, I like playing a lot of notes, but I like to hear them the way Jimi Hendrix played a lot of notes. You know, where the notes became sound. They weren't
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
notes. You know, for him, they were like spirit noises. Just circling back a little bit, I was going to say when I'm improvising, because I really spend a lot of my time and focus creating music that's written down, you know,
Yeah.
for other people
Yeah.
to play, you know, whether it's operas or orchestra pieces or string quartets. So I try, when I'm improvising, I really try to hear like a composer so that the music has an inevitability in its arc,
Yeah.
as if it was, you know, carefully composed. And then when I'm writing music to be played by, I want it to feel like the players are improvising, like they don't really quite know what's going to happen next or how it's going to resolve.
Yeah. Yeah. I listened to
Go into the next.
a record you did like 2 years ago. That is Syzygy,
Oh yeah, great.
which I loved. You know, and it's such a probably a thin line between what's written and, you know, in graphics or whatever, or what is improvised. And I guess that's what you were aiming at also, right?
Yeah, well, this is the thing, you know, graphic composition is a very special type of composing because you're relying on the creative interpretation of
Yeah.
the musicians. Yet anything you put in the signal path between, you know, what I call the inner ear and the sound is going to affect it. So if you have the players
Yeah.
following some, even if it's an abstract visual presentation, it's going to affect what they play. It's different. I mean, a lot of my writing is very exact. If I'm writing for an orchestra, you can't ask them to improvise. They don't do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. I had bad experience with this.
Yeah, they'll throw
Yeah.
bricks at you.
That was
Although,
terrible.
you know, let me say that the younger players often are very familiar and very much
Willing to try. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The younger classical players, especially in New York, are fantastic right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they have incredible chops. They can read anything you put in front of them, and yet
Yeah.
they'll experiment. They'll experiment with sounds. They'll improvise. They'll work with graphic notation. The graphic approach that I take starts with notated music, and then I bring it into Photoshop and I process it so that I'm creating something that is retinal art. It's a visual. It stands on its own. I mean, whether anyone likes it or not, I can't say, but I say it's a visual art, and the players can interpret it as sonograms, really, because a lot of what I'm doing is modulating images with sine waves and square waves and using feedback, so that players who are familiar with what sound looks like, who have analyzed sound in digital workstations, they have a sense, oh yeah, I can see here's sound sine waves, and here this thing is being modulated by a slow square wave, and that affects what they play. And some players more explicitly than others.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, when I listen to many records of yours, it's like this. Yeah, I love this thin line. I listened to Void Coordinates the other day also, and there's like some really complex stuff going on, like rhythmically, and then you go into improvising and you dive in. I mean, it's like, I love that stuff. Like I try to figure it out on some tunes, but it's impossible. Like that one song, Escatones.
Yeah.
Man.
It's actually the rhythmic element is composed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the tuning, and then, I gave more verbal instructions to it. But also, with that version of Carbon, we know each other so well.
Yeah, sure.
That I can say, a very brief introduction of what I want to sound like. I may say to Zena, like, an elephant on a roller coaster or something.
Yeah, and she
and
goes
Joe
there.
Trump, of course, no relation to he who shall not be named.
Yes, let's not do that.
But Joe Trump is just a fantastic drummer who can play almost anything, whether very complex written rhythms or improvising or African rhythms or gamelan rhythms. I mean, Joe is a monster.
Yeah.
I love playing with Joe.
It helps if you have this relationship going on with players, right?
Absolutely. It's a Duke Ellington concept. Duke Ellington always
wrote for the players. Yeah, sure. I love that. Yeah.
And I took that to heart. When I first learned about that, I took that to heart. So with Orchestra Carbon or my group Cisorg, a lot of the players are players I've worked with for a very long time. So, especially this is a New York thing. There's never any time to rehearse. Everyone is always too busy.
Sure.
And it's impossible to find a place to rehearse, especially if you have a big group. So you try to come up with systems, algorithmic systems or graphic systems, where you can put the music together very quickly and it will sound the way it's supposed to.
Yeah.
That's the other aspect of the composing these days, besides through composed work and graphics, is algorithmic work, where I'm defining a set of instructions for the players. Sometimes very specific instructions, sometimes more aesthetic or conceptual, and then they work through that, and that manifests the music.
Yeah. Is there a difference that you notice? I mean, nowadays maybe not, but maybe even earlier, like a difference between European and New York musicians regarding free improvisation?
I would say so. I think New York players will be more conscious of groove and more willing to dig in, and to make. I mean, the European players, especially the later group, they're also more noisy and more rhythmic, but they were, I would say, not as quick with the groove as American players.
Yeah.
But we began to see it in the 90s more, where like a group like Slaughterhouse. And in fact, I'll say here, the devastating news I heard 2 nights ago of Peter Hollinger's death. I don't know if you know Peter Hollinger, the drummer, percussionist.
No.
He had a band called Slaughterhouse, Slawterhaus, during the 90s, which was like kind of a mixture of house music and free improvised.
Oh man, I have to check this out.
Dietmar Diesner in it, and Connie Bauer and Johannes Bauer.
Oh really? Oh man, I love those guys.
I don't know if they ever made a record, but we were on a number of festivals together. We were all friends, and that was a lot of fun band.
Yeah, the German free guys. I love that stuff.
Yeah.
Some of it is amazing.
There's the whole microsound thing. I mean, some of the players are much more focused on a quieter realm, and absolutely free of rhythmic, and I some of it's fantastic, some of it I love, and some of it I don't. I mean, I've played with some of those players. I had a fantastic concert with Magda Mayas, who I might be considered in that scene a couple of years ago in Berlin, and she plays piano and inside the piano.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, it's so many different approaches. Like, but I wanted just to go back what you mentioned before, like
Sure.
I mean, I know when I first stumbled upon you, which was years ago, I think someone gave me a carbon record, and you know then I started digging into your music, and you know discovered the Monk project and the Terraplane and all these other free improvised projects that you did, and I was surprised how wide your musical range is. It's incredible. It's really like, you know, embracing almost the entire musical universe there is, like when I listen to you guys play. But I wanted to ask you, when did this interest in this wide range happen with you? Like, because you studied, I think, like all composition and other things, right? In the beginning, in the early 70s.
I was going to be a scientist, actually, you know. And
okay, that explains it. Okay.
Okay. I mean, most of my training, most of my school was focused on science studies, math and physics. You know,
Yeah.
I still, as an amateur, read as much as I can about what the current trends are in math and physics.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But in the summer of 1968, I had a fellowship to be a scientist's assistant. I was 17 years old at Carnegie Mellon University, and I did my work in the lab, but I had just gotten an electric guitar because I loved, you know, the Yardbirds and Jimi Hendrix and early Rolling Stones and early Grateful Dead. I mean, Jefferson Airplane, a lot of psychedelic rock, I think. And also blues. You know, I was just very, very heavy into it. And starting to, a bird just came to visit me on the windows.
Oh, man.
I won't turn the computer around, but he's kind of looking in saying, oh, I wonder what's going on here. And big pigeon. Anyway, so I really knew very little about how to play the guitar. I was teaching myself a few chords, but my fingers worked pretty well. I was using my electronics knowledge to build fuzz boxes and ring modulators. I was building some for friends before I went away. And my time in the lab, when I wasn't working as an assistant, I would build devices to make my guitar distorted and playing with a 7-head tape deck. And then I got a job at the radio station as a DJ from midnight to 4 a.m. And the radio station, WRCT, had a fantastic library and still does. It's a great radio station. In the times when I've gone back to Pittsburgh to play concerts, I've often gone there to visit and, you know, revisit my time at the radio station. So I would dig into the library and play everything. I was into the idea of electronic music just because it involved electronics. And so I discovered all of this incredible music by Mort Subotnick and Todd Dockstader, work by Stockhausen,
the Germans,
contemporary composition by Ligeti,
and
Davidovsky and Xenakis. Of course, Xenakis was one of my just absolutely took my head off, you know. So when I got back to my parents' house after that summer and to finish high school, I didn't care about my studies. I delved into the electric guitar fully, just trying to make as much noise as I can, trying to learn how to play it. Then I went to university, and I didn't want to study science. The other thing about that time of the science studies in 1968 was seeing how much of scientific studies were funded by the Defense Department.
Oh,
Vietnam War was raging.
Sure.
And all the scientists that I met, you know, we'd go to these colloquiums, they're all talking about getting funding, you know. I said, man, I don't want to be living this life, you know.
Yeah.
And so, you know, much to the horror of my parents, I began studying anthropology, you know, cultural anthropology, and playing in bands. I was in Ithaca, New York at Cornell University and playing in a bunch of psychedelic bands and doing solo acoustic guitar concerts a lot.
Already then? Oh, wow.
Yeah,
oh, wow.
Well, very much inspired by Ravi Bashaw and John Fahey and Leo Kottke, you know, open tuning. I had Yamaha 6-string, as I recall, and also playing slide guitar blues.
Yeah.
I was playing pedal steel in a country, in a kind of acid psychedelic country band.
Oh, man.
A girlfriend had given me a cowboy hat. I had a long beard and long hair at the time.
Oh, man.
So,
That's
you know,
beautiful.
it was interesting times.
That's beautiful.
And then after I left Ithaca, I was really becoming interested in jazz. This was like now 1971.
Yeah.
And Coltrane, of course. I mean, Coltrane I got into even before that summer in 1968 because of his death. There was a front page announcement in the news, and I said, well, who is this guy? And my buddy had a record that his father had, and we listened to it. I said, wow, Coltrane, you know?
Yeah.
Mingus, also Charles Mingus, the first record I bought was the Charles Mingus record, Oh Yeah. And it's still one of my favorite records.
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
Cecil Taylor, you know, I just
oh man.
finding unit structures for 99 cents in a bargain bin at a department store.
That's incredible. Yeah.
It was just discovery. You know, that's the beauty of the late and Sonny Chirac. I cannot.
Oh yeah. Shit. Yeah.
Very important early influence to me before, you know, in parallel with Jimi Hendrix and the blues guys and, you know, Mike Bloomfield, who was doing exploratory stuff, and Jeff Beck.
Yeah.
With Sonny Chirac. I saw Sonny play in 1969 with Herbie Mann's group.
Really?
And just completely destroyed me. I mean, Herbie Mann had an incredible group. Miroslavich, who was on bass.
Yeah.
And Bruno Carr, I think, was the drummer, kind of a funky drummer, and Roy Ayers and Vibes, and Sonny. And they did a version of the Beatles song Come Together.
Yeah.
And for Sonny's solo, he turned the reverb all the way up, and he made it sound like buildings, office buildings were crashing down, all the glass shattering. It was just, I mean, it was phenomenal. I'd never heard anything like it. It was, I mean, wow. I had heard Sonny on record, but hearing Sonny on record, the Monkey Pocky Boo record with Linda Chirac and a European rhythm section, French bass and drum, Beb Theo, I think, and Joe Guerin. It didn't prepare me for hearing Sonny live. You know, that was amazing. And then we got to be friends. And when I moved to New York in
really?
I met Sonny, and we because we were on the same record label. In 1989, we were both on Enemy Records. I mean, we would run into each other a lot in the scene. It was a very small scene, you know.
Yeah, sure.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
And then when we were both on Enemy Records, we would share bills, you know, with his band and my band, and we played together a few times in Austria, in Europe, in Vienna, in Helsinki. No, Pori Festival.
Pori Jazz. Yeah.
Yeah, and a couple of other times. Yeah. Now Sonny was fantastic, very funny guy. Also.
Oh wow, man!
He's always joking. Brilliant musician.
That's amazing. Like I also read regarding university or studies. You studied briefly with Morton Feldman.
Like yes, with Morton Feldman and Lejarn Hiller. This was when I was getting my graduate degree. You know, I pursued composition more and more.
Yeah.
And at Bard College, it was suggested that Buffalo might be a good place for me because Feldman and Hiller were there, and especially because of my interest in electronics.
Yeah.
At Bard in 1972-73, I was already working with algorithmic systems and with graphic notation and synthesizers. So I wrote to Lejarn Hiller. No, I called him, and he said, "Well, why don't you come and visit?" You know, so I drove to Buffalo, which was not an easy trip. It was like 8 hours driving, and had a very nice. You know, I think I left at 3 a.m, and I had a meeting with Hiller at noon, and he was very, very gracious. And you know, he's one of the. Do you know his work? He's one of the inventors of computer.
I know more. Yeah.
Feldman is much more famous.
Yeah.
But Hiller, a pioneer in algorithmic composition and computer music. He and John Cage together did a piece called Harpsichord, which is really, you could say, pioneering environmental work.
Yeah.
And so Hiller, when he found out that I had knowledge and experience in electronics, both theoretical and building, he hired me immediately to be an assistant in the electronic music studio.
That's amazing.
So this was in June, late June. And so then I went back to the Hudson Valley where I was living, and it gave me, what did I do? No, then the next day I went out looking. No, after the meeting with Hiller, I did this all in one day. After the meeting with Hiller, I bought a newspaper and found an apartment and rented it, and then drove back to the valley. So I got back. It was like 24 hours driving,
Oh man.
meeting with Hiller, renting an apartment, and then driving back. And then in August, I drove back to Buffalo, and with all my stuff, my tape recorder and my guitars and saxophones and clarinets, my dog. I didn't have much in the way of no furniture,
Yeah, sure.
not much in
Well,
the way of clothing, just the basics, you know.
that's a
And there
beautiful.
I was in Buffalo. So I was studying
Wow.
with Hiller. He was my advisor, but Morton Feldman kind of lorded over the music department, and he would have a weekly composers forum where we basically sat and listened to him talk, which was fantastic. I mean,
Yeah.
I loved hearing Morty talk because he was a brilliant man. I can't say he was a wonderful person by any means, you know.
Sure.
But you learn to separate the art from the artist, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I learned quite a lot. And because the electronic music studio was next to Morty's office in the basement of Baird Hall, I would often see him. When we would chat, he would ask me what I was doing, and sometimes he would ask me to come in and talk about what I was doing.
Oh, that's
Which
beautiful.
also led to two very confrontational experiences with Morty. One after my first concert there as a composer in Buffalo. It was a piece I recorded, a 90-second through-composed soprano sax melody played through a ring modulator. Slowed
wow.
it down to half speed. So now I had a 3-minute piece for ring modulated soprano sax. I recorded another layer of ring modulated soprano sax. It was really a lot like medieval music, like Cantus Firmus, one level.
Yeah. Layering, kind of. Yeah.
And then I slowed that down. So now I had a 6-minute texture, which I played live with the soprano sax and the ring modulator. So essentially, it was very much a composed piece, although the top layer was improvised.
Yeah.
And Morty called me into his office the next morning. He said, "Come here, sit down. Improvisation. I don't buy it." I mean, I'm trying to imitate his accent, and I can't do it justice.
Oh man.
Borough accent. Sorry.
Oh, no.
And I said, "Morty, I'm not selling it." So
That's amazing. Yeah.
and then we had another confrontation a few months later. I was involved in a lot of political stuff in Buffalo, especially around the Attica prison uprising, and you can do some research on that. And I wrote a piece about it called Attica Brothers Life Cycle, with Bobby Previtt on drums, if you know Bobby.
Yeah, sure. I did
Previtt's
talk like that with Bobby, and I saw him live so many times.
Yeah, so Bobby and I first met when I arrived in Buffalo, and we began playing together.
Oh, really?
Still one of my dearest friends. Yeah, 1974 we met when I got
already. Oh, yeah, I wanted to ask you this, like regarding Bobby. I know you worked together.
Yeah, no, Bobby is one of the greatest. So
Yeah.
Bobby on drums, Donald Knack, K-N-A-C-K. Perhaps you know him. He's a contemporary.
No. Have to check out all these guys. Oh, sorry, Elliott, I lost you.
An electric string quartet with myself on guitar, and a conga player named Spoon. And this is a big composers forum concert at the concert hall. The place is packed. We're about to start the piece. Now the piece, I had a conductor holding up time cards to indicate the different sections. This part of the piece was completely composed, part of it was graphic, part of it was algorithmic. Different sections for different players at different times. And the conga player, I did not want to have a music stand. I wanted him to symbolize the kind of the Africanism that was being suppressed in the prison uprising, and there was an undercurrent in American musical life and political life. So we're about to start, and so there's no music. We all have music stands except for the conga player. And Morty Feldman gets up and says, "Where's his music stand?" One. And Morty gets up on stage and grabs a music stand and slams it down in front of the conga player. Says, "Now you can play the piece."
Oh man!
And so then we played it, and he called me into his office the next morning. He said, "Music. You put too much music." Should be listened to sitting in red plush seats, and your music, it's for sitting on the floor. So.
Oh man, okay. Funny. Yeah, you would think he would be more open-minded in a way, like, you know, sense, or was it like what? No, yeah, funny.
Morty thought of himself as an aristocrat. You know, I mean,
Funny.
brilliant.
Yeah.
You know, there's
Yeah,
no
yeah,
doubt
sure,
about that.
sure.
You know, and some of his late pieces are some of my favorite pieces. For Benito Marcus, for Samuel Beckett, and
Yeah.
the orchestra piece Coptic Light is incredible. You know, I mean, Morty as a person, probably less. I mean, Benito Marcus has some very negative things, you know, to say, but I won't get into that. And I think she was a huge influence on his later music.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, it's funny. I would not. Like you said, you always have to separate the artist from the art. Yeah, it's.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why I sometimes started reading autobiographies and biographies, and I was like, yeah, I'll stop with that because it's just like breaks the picture, you know, of the art that artist has done. And you're like, man, this guy was like really a jerk, or you know, or whatever. It's like,
sure,
yeah, just enjoy the art he did. But Elliott, I wanted to ask you this, like, speaking of, you mentioned Bobby in '74, and when did you move then to New York, actually? When was that?
in '79, October of '79. After Buffalo, I lived for 1 year in Western Massachusetts, and I just needed a nice place to live. And guitarist David Fulton and I were playing together a lot. The first album on my label Zor was the duo of David and I, called Hara. And he had lived in Western Massachusetts, said it was very nice. And I knew some musicians there. I knew that Michael Gregory Jackson was living there,
Oh,
and
wow.
Marion Brown and Archie Shepp. And so I cold called Michael. I can't remember where I got his number from, maybe from Bobby. But he was out of town, but his girlfriend was there. And she said, well, listen, why don't you come visit, you know? And the drummer, Steve McCraven, was there. He was living in the house too.
Yeah.
And I had a fantastic time hanging out with Steve and talking with Chiquita, Michael's girlfriend. And they were very encouraging. Steve was very encouraging about living in Tizay. You can live inexpensively, you know. And
Yeah,
so I
back in
moved
the
there
day,
in
yeah.
August of '79 and spent a year there, and, you know, got to be friends with Marion and played with a lot of great musicians there, and realized that I had to move to New York. That was the big realization.
And how was this experience,
pleasant.
initial experience in New York when you came? You know, I've spoken to so many musicians who you played with and were part of this amazingly creative, you know, Wayne Horowitz and Bobby Pravitt. We talked so much about the early '80s, and everyone said that it was just so much happening in a way. Like, but I want to hear, how was your this initial experience?
Well, it was wide open, you know, because there wasn't a. Can you put it on pause? It's my wife. I need.
Oh yeah, sure. I will edit this out later. Okay. No worries. I'll write it down.
We're in the middle of an interview. What's up? What's up? What's up? Anything? Okay. Let me put the phone on airplane mode.
No worries. I'll just write it down to edit this out.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. So I mean, there's no. Were we recording again? Yeah. You know, there was no money in a way in the scene so everything was wide open. You played in little places. You know, I might do 4 or 5 gigs a night. I knew a few people before I moved there, and I found out that I knew more in the early days. I had played in a festival in Boston organized by a journalist named Michael Bloom. It was called the Gong Festival. And this was in April of 1979.
Mm-hmm.
And on the festival where, what's his name from Gong? Well, Julie Smith and David Allen. And they were backed up by New York Gong, which later became Material. So it was Bill Esmond on bass, and Michael Bynum on keys, and Martin Bisi sound mixing, and what's his name? Bacon on drums and Fred Maher, I think, alternating, and Cliff Coltrane on guitar. And so I got to know those guys. I got to know some of the guys in the band, the girls, Marc Kramer, who later became known as Kramer. And I mean, and Giorgio Gomelsky organized. Giorgio was one of my great heroes because he had produced the Yardbirds records in the 60s. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite Don McLaughlin albums, Extrapolation.
Oh man, yeah, my favorite record.
Yeah. So, here's Giorgio, this fantastic guy, and he's so warm and welcoming. At one point, Yachko Sefer from Gong was supposed to go solo, and he wasn't anywhere to be found. So Giorgio says, he grabs Kramer and me, and he says, "Go out there, go on stage and make something beautiful."
That's
so
beautiful.
It was just fantastic. So so when I moved to New York, I got in touch with a lot of people that I had met before through Giorgio and Steve Piccolo, who I had gone to school with. Steve Piccolo and John Lurie and Evan Lurie and I all had lived in a house together on the Hudson River. And they, of course, had the Lounge Lizards. So I would go see them. And Steve introduced me to everybody. So thanks to Steve's sponsorship, I could get into every club for free. He told the doorman, this guy, you have to let this guy. So, every night, if I was month there, I had no gigs and no money, so I would just go out every night. I'd go hear music every night, and then so I'd go to a club and John Lurie was playing, and I met Philip Wilson, another one of my great heroes, because I used to see him with the Paul Butterfield band.
Yeah.
And he had also played with the Art Ensemble of Chicago and with Jimi Hendrix. Philip Wilson, Frank Lowe.
Oh yeah, man, Frank Lowe.
Yeah. I'd go out every night, and then through a percussionist, Greg Ketchum, that was a friend of mine in Buffalo, I had an introduction to a dance company called the Improvisational Dance Ensemble. So they hired me. Hired is a loose term because there was no money, but I became their house composer. So for the next 6 months, we would improvise together, days of rehearsal, and then we would do 3 concerts, Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday afternoon. And so it was great to improvise with this dance company. And they were very, very advanced, using words spontaneously and movement, sometimes images. And through them, I would meet a lot of musicians like Bora Bergman and Jane Ira Bloom and Meredith Monk. And pretty soon I began to be in bands, or be invited to sit in. So I might do a gig with the dancers. I might get paid to rehearse with another dancer. I might get hired to back up a singer in like a little restaurant. I might play with a punk band. I might play with another punk band. I was working as a bass player because I also could read music.
Yeah.
I got hired by this band, The Must, led by Michael Musto, who was a gossip columnist. And it was a Motown band. And, of course, I love Motown music, especially the bass playing in Motown. Jamie Jamerson, one of the great virtuosos of all time.
Yeah.
Motown's music is like concerto for electric bass. So I learned all those bass lines. I brought Mark Miller, who was very well known as an improviser, playing in the same scene. Greg Kramer, who played synthesizer. Charles K. Noyes. It's funny, I have on computer right in front of me a duo album of Charles K. Noyes and I that we're recording now. I've been playing with Charlie since 1979, and we still continue to make music together. And
it's like, but
it was very rich time. Especially, I can't emphasize enough how wide it was. There was so much music. The thing I love the idea of being able to channel the feeling. So when I got heavily into Coltrane, when I was teaching, I was a professor, an assistant professor for a year in Buffalo after I finished my master's degree. And although I got fired after, anyway, that's another story. Anyway, I did finish my time there. I was fired from the music department, but rehired by the American Studies department.
Okay.
So anyway, but in the music department in the library, we had all these transcriptions of Coltrane solos
Oh wow, man.
that were done by I'm having Andrew White did. He did transcriptions of Coltrane and Eric Dolphy solos. So I would just photocopy them, one of my privileges as a professor, and just practice playing Coltrane solos on tenor saxophone until I felt like I could integrate that language, and then playing Eric Dolphy solos, and then playing Sonny Rollins, just Ornette, just trying to integrate that language. I wanted to feel what it was like.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean,
and play along with Bitches Brew and Live Evil. I would play along with Trout Mask Replica by Captain Beefheart until I learned all the guitar parts. Live Dead by the Grateful Dead, Jerry Garcia's playing in that period. You know, and Hendrix, of course, you know, I mean, this was all, you know, part of the, and then later trying to expand. Now, how do I put my own sound? And throughout, I was imagining a sound that captured the kind of free-flowing atonality that I was hearing in this, you know, pantonality, whatever you want to call it. It was sonic.
Yeah.
Ultimately, what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Influenced by Cecil Taylor's and Caro, you know, all was in the brew. So trying, what is my own sound? How do I filter this through my own love of mathematics, of algorithmic approaches, you know, of studying the weather. I really wanted my music to sound like the weather, you know, unpredictable.
That's beautiful.
Like terrifying, you know, beautiful. You know? And, you know, I was trying to find a way to produce this. Really what it comes down to is listening inside, you know. The closer I've come to realizing that, the more I don't work with an instrument. I just sit and listen, you know, until I can hear the music.
Yeah.
And then it's a question of figuring out how to make it. Does it mean writing it down? Does it mean making a graphic score? Does it mean working with a synthesizer? Does it mean picking up a guitar or a horn, or not doing anything, just taking a walk, you know?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, makes sense. So, that's incredible. Yeah, this kind of now explains what we started in the beginning. Yeah, actually, well, our talk about improvisation, like what you're saying now, it's kind of comes together for me. Your mind a little bit how it works. So, but I wanted to ask you then, which was we spoke about Carbon before, and was Carbon like the first kind of this unit that you formed in New York then, or did you already had some other groups, or was?
No, the first real band that I had, well, there was a group called Surds, which I conceived of as an improvising group. Originally, it was Bill Lazuel on bass and Marc Miller on drums. And we did a couple of gigs as with one with Frank Lowe as guest. We did a trio set that that was recorded and that I released on Bandcamp. And we did one gig the night Reagan was elected. It was with Henry Kaiser and Masahiko Kono and Charles Noyes as guests.
Wow.
So, and in fact, it's funny because we had 2 nights at this law. And because it was the night that Reagan was elected, our first night of the gig, there were only 2 people in the audience. But the 2 people in the audience were Derrick Bailey and Evan Parker.
So, no, seriously? Wow, man, that's beautiful.
Yeah, because they were our friends, you know, and they came to
that's so beautiful.
They came to the show. What else to do? The second night, you know, I don't think anyone was there. Everyone was in shock that Reagan was. We couldn't imagine it getting worse than Reagan. Of course.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine that things can get any worse. And now I'm an optimist. I know that things can get worse.
Exactly. Oh man.
And that's what we said in 2016.
Yeah. Well, let's not go there. Rather.
Yeah, no, let's not, because.
Yeah.
So, but then after Surds, I wanted to form. I was getting closer to how I wanted this music to Yeah, I think the internet was so shocked at that it froze.
Yeah.
So I had written a number of pieces that were released under the name ISM with Laswell on bass and some pieces, Oludara on trumpet, Art Barron on
Oh,
trombone.
really? Oh, wow.
I should go back. Okay, actually, I should go back because I had a band called Moving Info that played three concerts, and that started out with because Island Records had become interested in recording me. I'd sent a demo tape of a project I had called Human Error that I did when I was living in Massachusetts with the synthesist. And we just completed that record after 40 years. I just released that on Zorn. And it was a mixture of kind of electronic music, kind of krautrock, free improvisation, techno, noise, weirdness. It was a great band, When we played live, we would have Greg Ketchum on percussion, different guests. So that recording led to Island Records wanting to produce an album, who was also producing Madonna's first record.
Oh, wow. Okay. Bizarre.
Madonna would be up there, like they're in the middle of this scene. And, so Marc produced an album with Philip Wilson on drums and Laswell on bass and Art Barron on trombone and Miller on percussion. And eventually it came out on Glass Records in England. So I did some concerts with that band, with Laswell on bass, and some gigs with Percy Jones on bass and Oludara on trumpet.
Oh, wow, man.
Yeah, no, Percy was Percy. I met Percy very early on. As I said, it's a very small scene.
Yeah, but still.
I got hired to play saxophone in this band called Noise Are Us player in this band. So, Percy and I got along very well, and I invited him to play. And we did a few projects together over the years. And so then I formed this band, Moving Info, and then wrote this other piece called these pieces under the name ISM and formed a new band. It was a lot more like a hardcore band. It was in between the scene. I was playing, I had a residency at this little punk club in the East Village. Now I would invite musicians from the improvising scene, from the punk scene, and from the noise metal scene to improvise. And I had created a few simple structures, and we would just jam on them. It was different every time.
Sorry, Elliott, where did this connection with this hardcore and punk scene begin, like with improv? How did this happen, like in New York or in your era?
Well, I think it happened because, I had a girlfriend who was more involved in the punk scene. She was in a band called Mofungo. I was with them, and her roommate, her housemate, was in a band called the Stimulators, one of the early punk scenes with a very famous Harley Finnegan in the band, and they invented the term loud, fast rules. They were kind of post-punk, early hardcore, And I began to go to a lot of these scenes at the A7 Club. The scene, members of the Bad Brains would play there, and so I would hang out with them and go to their gigs. I was playing bass in a band called Crazy Hearts, with the singer from the Brains playing drums. No, the singer from the Bad Brains was playing guitar, and the drummer from the Bad Brains, Earl, was playing drums. And so there's a lot of cross-fertilization.
Yeah,
this led to me having this residency at this hardcore club. So I would invite musicians that I knew to come jam. And eventually, the group boiled down to this great bass player named Michael Brown, who had been in a band called Off Beach and Interference. And then finally, when the band really coalesced, it was either David Linton, again from Interference and Off Beach, or Bobby Previtt on drums, again calling back upon my old and dear friend, and a percussionist named Al Diaz, who was a graffiti artist also. He was the partner with Jean-Michel Basquiat in the graffiti duo called Samo.
Oh yeah.
Now, see, there was a
like my name, yeah.
there was a restaurant called Bynum. And worked as a waitress there, and Basquiat's girlfriend worked as a waitress there. So you'd hang out there. I would go there almost every night because I could basically drink coffee for free, you know, because I had a friend as a waitress. And food was terrible. The food was terrible, but it was cheap, you know. But you'd see hanging out there all the people from the no wave scene. You might see William Burroughs come in, Allen Ginsberg, Quentin Crisp, Lydia Lunch, George C. Scott, the bass player, George Scott, Lounge Lizards, you know, writers. Basquiat would be there, Keith Haring, you know, everybody would be in there at one time. King Creole and the Coconuts and Codamundi would be in there. I mean, everybody would be in there. That was the subject of my opera, Bynum, about the murder by Jack Henry Abbott.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I was there that night. I was leaving as Abbott was coming in, and I was friendly with the waiter that he killed. You know.
Yeah. Oh man, Jesus.
That's another story. Yeah, it was the East Village was just really like this intense,
bustling, kind
of between all the artists, the visual artists, the gallery scene was just coming up, the drug scene, the disco scene, the gay disco scene. The Saint was right next door to the Bynum, so you'd see all the people hanging out there, lining up to go there. I mean, it was everything.
Amazing.
The East Village was every world colliding. You know, it was all there in this little, because it was cheap.
Yeah, sure.
So
that's
what makes a scene. That's what makes a scene cook. You know.
Amazing. Yeah. You know, when you tell these things, like it's hard to believe, you know, like many people told me even before, like the 70s, how cheap and creative New York was, that you could actually
come there
do things
earlier. I wish I'd come there earlier.
Yeah.
Even though I'm glad I came when I did. You know, the thing is, so with ISM, we did an album and we did some concerts, and then I expanded it into an orchestral version for a show at the Kitchen. And then I began getting disillusioned with a lot of the New York scene. Kind of postmodernism was taking over, sort of jokey improvisation, you know. To me, it wasn't funny, and it wasn't very interesting, and it missed the groove. I traveled in Mexico for a while. The very first version of Carbon was with Jonathan Cain. I was beginning to think about a new band and starting to make some sketches. So in 1983 at the White Columns Festival, I did the first version of Carbon with Brick Brown playing steel drum and bass played with mallets, and Jonathan Cain, who was also the drummer in the Swans. And we did this gig, and then we did a couple of gigs. I'd met this girl, Maria Pilar, who was a fantastic, weird singer. And so then the next version of Carbon was her and Jonathan Cain and I, and she and I were partners, and things got very chaotic. We played some festivals in Europe with David Linton on drums, and then things got very chaotic, and I went to Mexico, Marie, for a while, and I just became very, I don't know, I went into outer space for a while. And while I was there, I just began focusing on mathematics. I became very isolated. I kind of shut down everything I was doing, everybody I was hanging out with, and working with Fibonacci numbers, just immersing myself in the geometry of Fibonacci numbers, and wrote a new set of pieces, and that became the first Carbon album. I was working with a Bolivian musician who I had met through a Chilean friend of mine. A very well-regarded musician in Bolivia, his whole family. And I was with him, I was playing synthesizer and bass, and he was playing quena and sanfonia, the instruments. He was building the traditional instruments. And he said, why don't you come to Bolivia? I said, okay, maybe I will. And I said, first I need to record this music. So I recorded these first carbon pieces, and I was very happy with the way they came out. And all of a sudden, and I sent some tapes out. I put it out myself. I said, I'm going to put the record out on Zorn.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to move to Bolivia because I was sick of New York. But the record did really well. It got a lot of good press. It sold a lot of records. I got licensed it to a couple of European labels. And all of a sudden, I was back in the music business again. I was getting invitations to tour and play festivals, and I said, "Okay, well, why not? Here I am. I'll do this."
That's wow. Okay.
So Carbon expanded, and we made more records.
Yeah.
So,
Carbon
really
is
kind of like.
Sorry, Carbon is basically
going
like
down in flames.
Yeah. No, but it's still like a really long working band you had, like starting in '83. Like you still did records like 10 years ago, or even now. Like,
well, Void Coordinates. It was a return.
Yeah.
Patrick Landolt at Intact asked
I
me,
love that record.
Could you get together this band? Can you get together this band and make a new record? And I said, okay, great. So we did.
Okay, that's how it happened. Okay.
You know, because I was only doing orchestra carbon, which was doing more algorithmic and composing work. And then we did a tour after Void Coordinates came out. And then after that, it was more algorithmic things. Syndicate from 1996, totally algorithmic piece. And then the later thing has been Sysorg. You know, that's kind of replaced it. Although there's occasional orchestra carbon gigs. I've been thinking about bringing everybody together again. I have to.
Yeah, that would be beautiful. Yeah.
Maybe we could do a carbon tour. You know, I don't know. I would love to do it. The last one was the record we did on Intact called Transmigration and the
Migration. Yeah. That's from Zalfelden, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I love it.
And that was for me a very. The piece itself came together very quickly. It felt very of the moment. You know, I said, yeah, this is music I want to make right now. And Bobby and Zena were both into it, and we did it. And, you know, we rehearsed very quickly because that provided a certain structure. And then there were some mathematical structures, timing that we played, and some instruction sets and some improvisation. And between it all, it came together very quickly. But also because our communication is great. You know, I mean, I've played with Bobby how many years now? What is it, 70?
You said 74, almost 50 years. Right. Yeah. That's amazing.
And it's amazing. We haven't gotten any older. We're still you know,
exploring and creative. Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I love that.
And we began to play together when she moved to New York in around 1986, I think it was.
Already, awesome. Wow, man. Yeah. That's what you said.
Yeah, she was on the Carbon album Data Side, which with Linton and Sam Bennett, which was.
That's also 86.
Another exploration of the world of cyberpunk, because I got very heavily into cyberpunk when William Gibson's book Neuromancer.
Yeah.
For the first time, and just delved heavily into computer music. You know, when I first studied computer music in Buffalo in 1974, it was interesting to me intellectually, but it was not at all satisfying to me in a visceral way, because really what you had to do, you sat there and wrote code and punched cards. You'd end up with a big box of cards. You had to bring them to the other campus by bus. Hopefully they would run the program without bugs. Then you'd get a digital. They had one of the two digital to analog converters in New York State. They would run the audio. Then you'd bring it back to the music department to listen. And you might have like 5 seconds of a noise that sounded like
so bizarre
chord. Of course, it was the seeds of what is reality now. But I wasn't patient enough. I just want to give me a fuzz box and an electric guitar, you know.
Yeah.
I'd rather just make a noise, you know.
That's amazing. But you mentioned 86 now, and I wanted to ask you, how important was Zorn in this case? I know you did that Downtown Lullaby and Cobra and all that. How did your story with Zorn begin through all these connections? And
Well, we had a lot of mutual friends, and when my first few interactions with John were a little difficult, but we later, I think we operated in different worlds, and we, I mean, he was very negative and he thought that was like ridiculous, But we began to improvise a bit together, probably around 1983, 84.
already,
And then
okay.
I played in Cobra. We had
Yeah.
85. I played in Cobra. We had a big falling out over Cobra, though. I mean, I don't want to get it. John is like a cousin.
Yeah. Okay.
We share a love of a lot of music. We've had some fantastic gigs together, improvising. In separate universes for the most part.
Yeah.
He's really like family. He's family in many ways.
No.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Okay. No, I won't dig further. But Elliott, I just wanted to ask you also about your saxophone playing and the trio Aggregat with Brad and Chess. I love that band. This is because it's like the jazziest group I think you did ever, right? And how did you decide to do that project, and what's the background of that one?
Just from practicing saxophone and saying, I like playing the sax. There's this great Sonny Rollins quote. He says, "Life is playing the saxophone." And I said, well, yeah, that is certainly a life,
Yeah.
And I do love playing the saxophone. It really requires a dedication of time that I don't, because it requires a real. I can play soprano sax. I have a very tight embouchure from playing classical clarinet for many years in school. I was, I felt like I was pretty adept on clarinet, and I still play bass clarinet. Bass clarinet for me is quite easy to pick up. I never
Really?
lose the
Oh, wow.
embouchure or the
Man, really? Wow.
Bass clarinet is in some ways very simple, but tenor saxophone really requires a physical kind of dedication. And I began saying, well, I wanted this and music that could be played. And we did a second Aggregat album. I don't know if you know it, with Barry Altschul on drums. Yeah.
Oh, no, I don't know that one. Really?
Yeah, also on Clean Feed.
I know the one with
Altschul
Nate Woolley.
Taylor Bynum.
Really? I have to check this out.
Oh,
man.
There's three. That's right.
I don't know this one with Barry. I love Barry. I really have to check it out, man. Wow.
And we did the European version of it because of the expense of Paul Litton on drums.
Really?
And Peter Herbert.
Herbert, yes. Sure.
Peter Herbert. We did the trio of Paul Litton and Peter Herbert.
Really? Oh, man.
Okay, so you have to edit. And we did a great tour. We really had a fantastic.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'd like to do another Aggregat record. I mean, I'm 70 years old now. Who knows how much time I have? I mean, my mother's still alive, 94.
Wow.
Bless her. My father lived to be 93, 94. So maybe I have some years left. I'm in pretty.
Oh, come on! You look good, man. You look full of energy, and
I feel good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks to the lifeblood of coffee.
Oh yeah. Well, come on. We need that. That's good. So wow, it's beautiful.
People say sex, drugs, rock and roll. For me, it's life, love, coffee, music. It's like it all keeps you going.
That's a beautiful quote. That's a beautiful.
I have a fantastic family. They really they keep me
supportive.
Alive.
That's important. Yeah, that's beautiful. Oh, cool. Thank you, Elliott, for sharing some of these thoughts. I love that. It's really nice to hear some of this stuff.
My pleasure. Try and make them into a coherent stream.
No, I usually leave it just like I will just edit some bits that the Peter Herbert and when the phone, your phone rang. Otherwise, I love this stream of kind of.
Yes, exactly.
Usually leave,
reality.
Yeah, and people talking. I sometimes cook and put on like an interview with whoever creative and just listen to that, for 1 hour, right? Chopping carrots and onions. I love that. It's just like I don't know. So that
I love to cook. Actually, I'm the main cook in
really?
my family.
Me too.
I mean, my wife is. Yeah, my wife is. I'm also very with her art and her work. So I really, cooking is one of my main joys, especially during the lockdown. I really got deep into cooking.
It's like a meditation.
Dinner time was one of our favorite times.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes when I'm thinking about making something creative, it's like, no, it's not going to be music. I'm going to try and make this dish, or what can I do? I'll go to the market and say, what's fresh? What can I do with this, and this,
Yeah, that's also a way to improvise. Yeah, sure. I love that. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think great cooks improvise a bit.
Oh man, the great chefs. I'm obsessed with that. Like I watch cooking shows all the time. Like, man, and see like they're like, yeah, I'll put this in and like that. Really? Yeah, and then you try it, and it's like, wow, okay. It's like jazz or improvised music. It's the same in a way, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, that's beautiful.
And when you're in the kitchen and you're trying to juggle everything, you don't want to burn anything. This has to be cooked. It's really like a dance,
Yeah, it's like a dance.
I love when I was living in Ithaca, when I was going to school there in 1970, I had a girlfriend who lived in a town nearby, in a little town called Cortland, and I would visit her at like 3 in the morning. We would go to this just a little corner diner, 24 hours, and just sit at the counter to watch the short order cook. And it was really, and it was a very busy place. It was the only place that was open at that time of night, a small town. So you'd have the jocks and the bikers and the cops and everybody coming in there, and the food always, like flying off the grill. It was, I just loved watching it.
Yeah, that's like cool. It's like watching the Japanese restaurants, chefs,
Oh yeah, looks fantastic.
Man, it's like a dance, like you said, yeah, like with food and all that. I love that, yeah. Beautiful.
Dr. Jazz.